put this on first, really, shouldn't I? Because it's going to go really loud. Shouldn't have done that. Edit it out. Probably won't. Right, so still, where are we? Friday, 4th of November. And the last of the three that I've done tonight, which is probably why I'm being silly right now, is a very, very rare of the three that I've had. Cappadonic was rare, Colburn was very rare and very expensive, and this particular one is even more rare and even more expensive. It is this Convalmore, or Convalmore, I don't really know how you pronounce it, which was incredibly kindly donated by Andrew A.P. Butler. The generosity of this guy is just beyond belief. And the fact he sent me this along with, I think he donated Milburn and Ladyburn and a whole heap of others, that it's just ridiculous. The guy is just defies belief. So Convalmore is here. And was founded in 1893 by a company called the Convalmore Glenlivet Distillery Company. So it was founded in 1893, but production didn't start till 1894. It was then sold in 1904, because again, as I was talking about with the Colburn and a few of the other Speysides, the turn of the 1900s was a very bad time for Scotch whisky, and if you managed to make it through to 1910, you were doing a really bloody good job, because it was about the turn of the century when the Patterson crisis happened, which I'm not going to go into again because I'm already sick of talking about this, with these brothers that basically were responsible for closures of distilleries because they were spending far too much money on credit. General malaise in the industry, lack of demand, overproduction, all sorts of stuff going on, and distilleries were just either really struggling or closing left, right and centre. Convalmore was sold in 1904, but then a year later was sold again to James Buchanan, who I covered off when I did Buchanan's blended whiskey. Was it Buchanan's 12-year-old, which I think was when I was in Florida back in May. Oh, I wish I was back in Florida now. Not really, because these three are really good. All right, I wish I was back in Florida with these three. And James Buchanan was a Londoner that ended up producing a very popular blended whiskey. And he bought the distillery essentially to cover stocks. And that's really all Convalmore's been, like Colburn that we've just had, like Cappadonic, like Altavane, like Bravel, where it's a single malt distillery that is producing malt just to go into blends and just isn't available as a single malt because there's no need for them to release it. The distillery suffered a quite devastating fire in 1909, and it was essentially just completely rebuilt. Now, apparently, at that time when they rebuilt it, they also trialled a method of making single malt whiskey in a continuous process that wasn't quite the column still that's used for grain whiskey, but was very similar, to be able to do make single malt whiskey but in a continuous process, rather than having the pot still where you've got to fill it up, distill, empty it, put another batch in. This was a way of being able to do it. Didn't really work, didn't really pay off. They stopped doing it in 1916 apparently. Then in 1975 it transferred to Distillers Company Limited, who we've covered off a few times before, because Distillers Company Limited either joined forces or became part of UDV, who was United Distillers, who became Diageo eventually through various mergers, acquisitions, blah 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 blah. But yeah, DCL is kind of a precursor to Diageo. They did expand the distillery in the 1970s, but then in 1985, the same year as Colburn, which you've just had, they mothballed it. So it was all a bit of a waste of time them doing all that work in the first place. Now in 1990, ownership was actually transferred to William Grant and Sons, but the equipment was dismantled, and there's no intention apparently of them doing anything with the distillery. It's basically a warehouse. It's a storehouse for Glenfiddich and Balvenie, and probably some Kininvie, which is the other distillery that they've got. But that's it. It's a storehouse. There's no equipment there. That's all been removed. There is nothing. It is literally for them to store casks of the other distilleries that are operational that they've got. So yes, it's a bit of a shame. It's kind of there but not there. It's just literally a shell of what it was once before. So very, very difficult to find any Convalmore generally. No official bottlings per se. This is kind of as close as you get. I don't even know who released this. There are two versions of this, and I don't know whether it's Diageo, but it's not part of their rare malts range, or whether it's Grant's that have done it. But it seems to, I've got hiccups now. It seems to be an official bottling. Now this is what the full-size bottle looks like, and there is also so this is 36-year-old Convalmore. So it was distilled in 1977 and it was bottled in 2013. Now there is also a 28-year-old. Yes, there is a 28-year-old that the Whisky Exchange are selling the 28-year-old for £1,000. But the 36-year-old they haven't got listed. And doing a bit of research, I did find the 36-year-old apparently for sale in a company called Alexander and James, who have UK phone numbers but appear to be based in the Netherlands, who are selling a 70-year-old bottle of this for 599 quid. Now, considering the 28-year-old's £1,000 at Whisky Exchange, and they're selling a 36-year-old for 599 quid, it's either pretty good value for money, relatively speaking, or the 28-year-old is much, much better than the 36. So, I mean, it's not like I'm going to find the 28. I'm really bloody lucky I've got this for a start. But yeah, if anybody has got a 28-year-old and a 36-year-old, let us know what they're like side by side, will you? Seriously doubt that's going to happen, but you never know. So, yes, I am one jammy bastard to be able to try this now, particularly having just tried a 1972 apparently 30-year-old, a 28-year-old, 30-year-old Colburn, and then a 20-year-old Capidonic beforehand. What a Friday night. It's just ridiculous. I am one very, very lucky boy. But then I've been incredibly lucky all the way through this challenge to have all the donations of even what you consider bog standard stuff from the people in the whisky community are amazing. 99% of the people that drink whiskey are generous and kind and funny, and yes, a lot of them are geeks, and yes, a lot of them are nerds, but they love it and they're happy to share and they love to talk about it, and the vast majority aren't bothered if you don't like something they do or if they don't like something you do. There's very, very few arguments, and the arguments that I do find online tend to be more frustration at the marketing or the bigger companies that just take the piss, because there are people out there that will happily buy it and don't really want to think about it. That's an argument for a different day that we'll just go around in circles anyway. So I'm waffling because it's Friday and I'm tired. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a lot of that left, so it's not like I can pass that on to somebody else. So, I would assume no colouring added, and I would assume no chill filtration, I'm guessing. And what I don't know is what casks they were matured in, because I couldn't actually find. So, sherry, bourbon, white lightning, who knows. But a deep, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to pick that up, but that's a really deep that's a kind of burnt umber caramel, that's a caramel colouring. You know, if that was like a blended whiskey, or if that was a 10-year-old, I'd be going, there's colouring added to that. Whereas that is, I'm guessing it's not had colouring added to it, but that is a lovely, deep, rich colour. So, 36-year-old, 1977, that was the year before I was born. This whiskey is nearly as old as I am. 58%, so this is cask strength. Crap. I need to get some water, don't I? Bear with me. Let's see if this stretches all the way. Right. So, two things have just happened. One, I caught it, fortunately, so I didn't break it. The iPad is still operational, thank Christ for that. Two, I didn't realise that I'd inadvertently pressed stopped when I caught it. So I've just been talking for about 5 minutes to nothing. So I should try and start again, because I have noosed it already and I've had the tiniest little sip, and then started waffling on about a podcast I listened to, and then realised that it wasn't even recording anymore, which is really, really bloody annoying. So the nose on this has pretty much everything. Fortunately, I've not added water to this, but I will need to add water having taken a sip of it. But on the nose, it's 58%, but it doesn't have any burn. It's not hitting the back of my nose. But when I was nosing it earlier, which feels like about half an hour ago, there was apple that had been reduced down cooking in a pan, banana, mint, toffee, smoke, white pepper, and a touch of black pepper. It kind of goes from delicate to rich and fruity to quite light and fresh and minty, back down to really rich and deep. There's loads on the nose, absolutely loads. Now I'll take another sip, because that was all I'd done so far. Now the alcohol percentage is just slightly too high. There is a very slight mintiness to it, but it's a bit of a sweeter mint. There is a malty character to it. The pepperiness isn't there as much as it is on the nose. It's not really a kind of, it's slightly oily as well. And the reason I was talking about a podcast, and I shall say this exactly the same thing again, is I'm going to try and get the two guys to watch this particular episode, because it's two gentlemen, I think are called Mr. Pie and Mav, who run a podcast called The Bourbon Gents. Now they're on Twitter as Bourbon Gents, at Bourbon Gents. And funnily enough, they talk about bourbon. Now they've only done 5 episodes so far, so they've only not been going for very long. But I listened to their 4th episode yesterday, which was on Noah's Mill, and I'm going to catch up to the rest, because that was the first one I listened to. Literally, it was like, well, I've done Noah's Mill, let's see what they think of that. And when they were doing the tasting on the podcast, one of them was talking about the fact that he never adds water to it because he doesn't really he doesn't see why, because it doesn't seem to do anything. And in the case of Noah's Mill, something like that, yes, it's a higher alcohol percentage, but because it's so well balanced, you don't actually need to add the water to it. And adding water to that does actually take it away. However, the reason I'm wanting them to watch this, and hopefully they are right now, is the fact that I want to add water to this because I can tell that the higher alcohol percentage of 58 is masking some of the flavours that are there. I can taste this malty toffee caramel character, but I've got to find it underneath this burn of the alcohol, and I want that toffee flavour rather than the burn, because I think that alcohol percentage is masking the flavours that are there. That's why I'd be adding water to it. Now, it might be that you prefer the alcohol burn and that's what you're looking for with some underlying characters. What I'm trying to do is dig underneath the burn and get those underlying characters and just let them come out more, because, and it doesn't necessarily have to be every cask strength whiskey, because if it's 40%, they've already watered it down. They've already added the water for you, and sometimes you can add too much. And it's difficult, it is literally drop by drop by drop. And because I'm only doing 25 ml of each one, there have been 1 or 2 where I've put too much water in it and it's too late, it's gone. I'm dealing with 25 mils. But on this one in particular, I'm picking up too much of a raw alcohol fire, but I can tell that there are these flavours underneath. There is this real rich fudginess underneath, but I'm having to fight the burn to get to it. And what I want to do with adding the water is just to temper it down and just try and let those fudgy flavours. What you're trying to do is not, what the aim is, what you're trying to do, I'm going to do it better than you. The aim of adding the water is to not dilute everything. So imagine it's columns of flavour. So you've got alcohol burn and fudge and mint and raisins. And by adding water, all of them go down. Hopefully adding the water will just make that go down and all the others will actually stay or even rise above, because you don't have that fire to kind of fight against. So that's why. But, if you think it doesn't need it, it doesn't need it. And not all of them do. So I'm going to add a little bit in because it's such a small amount that it's not going to need a huge amount. And I'm hoping, because I'm not trying to knock it down to 40%, it might only need to be 50, something like that. See, already on the nose, well, on the nose it's lighter, but it is, those flavours are still there. In fact, there's a chocolatiness coming through to this now as well. It's like a milk chocolate. There's actually a little bit more on the nose. It's a bit more, there's mint, but there's milk chocolate. There's, the fruitiness is still there. The smokiness is a bit more subdued, but it's actually allowing some more flavours to come through. Hopefully, because I don't have a lot left, hopefully I'll have got it. Right, yes, now we're talking. So, that intensity of the heat of the alcohol is way reduced. It's still there. I think I've managed to land it about bang on, because there is still a little bit of heat to it, but it's nowhere near as prickly. It's kind of like needles in your tongue and in the roof of your mouth. And now I can taste that fudginess a lot more, and the mouthfeel all of a sudden, rather than my tongue and my mouth going, oh, there's a lot of alcohol in here, the mouthfeel feels a lot thicker and richer, having added water. I've diluted it, but it feels thicker and richer. And that this really, the fudginess all of a sudden has become like I've got a piece of fudge in my mouth and it's melting in my mouth. It's become really syrupy. There is a really soft smokiness to it. The mintiness is a bit more subdued, to be honest, but it's still there, but it's not quite as prominent as it was before. And there's another kind of, and it's slightly minty, but it's more like Angelica flavour. So it works really well, and the chocolatiness is there. That milk chocolate kind of comes through. So that bit of water, which wasn't a lot, has improved the whiskey in my mind, into my palate. I'm not fighting the alcohol. It's there, it's still got a bit of a kick to it, and it's a bit of a hit, but I don't feel like it's masking flavours. I think adding that water has allowed the underlying flavours to really come out and go, oh, hello, I'm here. I'm Fudge, nice to meet you. I was a bit kind of like being kicked on by alcohol burn, but now he's gone for a bit. I can play with you now, and it's really enveloped those flavours. So that's kind of why. When I was listening to the podcast, I was kind of like not shouting at the speaker, but kind of like, but and you can't butt in on a podcast, obviously, because it's rude and physically and not mentally, technologically possible. But it's that's why. So hopefully this was like a cracking example and a really good excuse for me to talk about Bourbon Gents and tell other people that are watching this to go and check them out on iTunes. And I don't know if they've got, was it Stitcher and all this lot, but yeah, go and give them a listen. If you like bourbons, it's worth checking those two guys out, because they sound like a bit of a laugh, and I should be catching up on the other episodes. But that, with water, without water, it's just a little bit too hot. But with water, that is one hell of a whiskey. It's got bags in it. It's got bags of flavour. Has it got as much on the nose? Maybe not. The nose is incredible, but interestingly, the nose on the other two were absolutely amazing, and yet the palate, not quite as good. That is definitely the best of the three in terms of the palate. And for a 36-year-old, was it 36? Yeah, for a 36-year-old at that age to still have that much flavour is pretty damned impressive. Right, Andrew, thank you incredibly so for that. That's just mind-blowingly generous of you to share something like that with me. That was amazing. That was absolutely brilliant. And what a way to start the weekend. Next one's going to be a bit of a disappointment because you can find it on the shelf now. Anyway, right, that's me done. I'm going to go to bed. It's very late. Right, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.